Welcome back for another deep dive. You know how we do it, taking a big stack of research and kind of boiling it down to the good stuff just for you?
Exactly.
So today we're going deep into the world of ketamine.
Ooh, ketamine.
But not in the way you might think.
Okay.
We're not focusing on like the medical side or the risks,
Right.
but rather on the fascinating strategies that users themselves employ for consumption and harm reduction.
It's really interesting because what we have here is a study from Italy,
Okay.
and it focuses on a really unique group of people who use ketamine pretty regularly but have never sought treatment for addiction.
That's a really key point, right?
Yeah, it's a window into a world that's often hidden.
These are functional ketamine users,
Yeah.
not necessarily folks who are struggling with addiction.
Yeah.
Which suggests that they've maybe developed their own methods for managing the risks.
Right.
So that's really, I think, our mission today is to pull out those strategies
Yeah.
and see what we can learn from them.
Yeah, and the study itself is packed with these intriguing details about sourcing quality control, even unwritten rules that these users follow.
It's almost like a secret society of harm reduction happening.
It really is.
Under the radar, I'm hooked already.
Uh-huh.
So paint us a picture of these ketamine users. Who are they?
Sure. So a study looked at 48 individuals, mostly in their early 20s, with a pretty even split between men and women.
Okay.
And what's so striking is that they're not who you might picture when you think drug user.
Right.
These are students, people with jobs, active social lives.
So they're integrated.
Yeah, they fit right in.
Interesting. So they're not, living on the fringes of society, but they are engaging with ketamine regularly.
Right.
What else does the study tell us about their substance use?
Well, here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
They're actually what we call polydrug users,
Okay.
meaning they're using multiple substances, not just ketamine. So
Right.
we're talking cocaine, MDMA, cannabis. They also reported heavy alcohol use.
So ketamine is just one piece of the puzzle.
It's not necessarily the main event in their substance use.
Does the study shed any light on why they use ketamine? What are they hoping to get out of it?
So while the study doesn't get super deep into their motivations,
Okay.
understanding those motivations can be a key to understanding their consumption strategies.
I see.
Think about it. If someone is using a substance for escapism versus social enhancement, that's going to influence how they approach it.
That's a great point. It adds like another layer of complexity to the picture.
Uh-huh.
Speaking of complexity,
Mm-hmm.
what about risks? What are their biggest concerns around using ketamine?
You might think it would be health effects or addiction,
Yeah.
but that wasn't their primary focus. Their top fears were actually social and legal consequences.
Okay.
So they worried about getting caught by the police, not being able to hide the effects of the drug and the stigma of being labeled a drug user.
Which makes total sense given that they're so integrated into mainstream society.
Exactly. Those consequences would hit them hard.
So how do they navigate those risks?
Right.
How do they even go about getting ketamine in the first place?
It's really a world built on trust and discretion.
Okay.
The study found that most of them sourced ketamine through their friendship networks,
Oh, interesting.
often directly from the seller's home.
Really?
No shady back alleys or dark web deals here.
Wow.
It's all very close-knit and informal.
So it's like a hidden economy
It really is.
operating within their social circles.
Yeah.
I guess that level of trust probably makes them feel safer,
Uh-huh.
but it also adds to the secrecy, right?
Absolutely. Secrecy is paramount.
Yeah.
They went to great lengths to keep their ketamine use hidden from family, colleagues, sometimes even other friends.
Wow.
They even use coded language to talk about it,
Really?
which further emphasizes the need for control and discretion.
It's like they're living double lives.
Right.
Maintaining a sense of normalcy while engaging in this clandestine world
Yeah.
of ketamine use. Okay, so they've got their sources. They're being discreet. But what about the drug itself?
Yeah.
How do they know that what they're getting is safe?
Right.
I mean, we're not talking about pharmacy-grade stuff here.
That's where it gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
They developed these incredibly intricate DIY quality control methods.
Okay.
They rely on sight smell, even observing the effects on others before partaking themselves.
It's like a combination of street smarts and folk wisdom.
It really is.
They're creating their own safety protocol
Yeah.
outside of any official system. So I'm guessing those protocols extend beyond just checking the quality, right?
You're absolutely right. The study uncovered a whole set of unwritten rules
Okay.
that dictate not just dosage, but also where, when, and with whom it's considered acceptable to use ketamine.
So it's not just about getting high.
Right.
It's about crafting a specific experience,
Yeah.
a controlled experience. Tell me more about these rules. What kind of guidelines are we talking about?
Well, for starters, they're very particular about the setting. Ketamine is typically reserved for like social or recreational environments, places where they feel safe and comfortable.
So think parties, clubs, maybe just like hanging out at a friend's house.
Exactly.
It makes sense given that ketamine can have dissociative effects.
Right.
You'd want to be in a familiar
You want to feel safe.
and supportive environment. Did they ever use it alone?
While the study doesn't explicitly mention solitary use,
Okay.
it did emphasize the importance of finding a safe space,
I see.
which suggests that they prioritize a sense of security regardless of whether they're alone or with others.
Interesting how these rules prioritize both social connection and personal safety,
Yeah.
even when it comes to a drug that's often associated with escapism. What about the timing?
Right.
Were there specific times they preferred to use ketamine or times that they specifically avoided?
Timing was definitely a key factor. A significant majority, about 70%, stated that they would never use ketamine before engaging in any activity that required focus.
Oh, wow.
Whether it was driving, studying, or working on a project,
They were really aware of those cognitive and physical effects.
they were very aware.
That's incredibly responsible.
It
It shows a level of self-awareness and self-regulation that you might not expect from recreational drug users.
Right.
It challenges the stereotype of recklessness that's often associated with drug use.
Exactly. They're clearly mindful of the drug's impact and take steps to avoid situations where it could pose a risk to themselves or others.
Okay, so they avoid using it when they need to be sharp.
Right.
But did they have any preferences for when they did choose to use?
Interestingly, about a quarter of the participants specifically mentioned that they only used ketamine when they were already in a positive emotional state.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't about escaping negative feelings.
This
It
is
was about enhancing an existing good mood.
so fascinating.
Yeah.
Like a real intentionality and self-awareness around their ketamine use.
Absolutely.
It's not just chasing a high, it's curating an
Yeah,
experience.
precisely. They're in control, making choices that align with their desired outcomes.
Okay, so we've covered the where and the when. What about the with whom? Did they have any rules about who they shared ketamine with?
Oh, absolutely. This was a big one. Almost 2/3 of the participants emphasized the importance of using with others,
Okay.
and they were very specific about who those others were. About a third explicitly stated they'd never use ketamine with strangers.
So trust and familiarity are paramount.
Right.
It speaks to that social aspect of ketamine use that we've been talking about.
Right.
It's a shared experience, not a solitary pursuit.
And that desire for control extends beyond just the setting and timing. It also influences who they choose to share the experience with.
Did the study go into any more detail about who they avoided using ketamine with?
Yes, over a quarter of the participants specifically mentioned avoiding use with people who weren't regular ketamine users.
Okay.
They valued a shared understanding of the drug, its effects, and those unspoken rules.
It's like they formed a subculture within their social circles. A group that understands and respects the nuances of ketamine use. It's fascinating how these practices just kind of emerge organically.
It really highlights the human desire to connect, to find common ground, even in seemingly unconventional ways.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that recreational drug use is often intertwined with social dynamics and a sense of belonging.
And so we've covered a lot of ground already. The setting, the timing, the social context. What else can you tell us about these unwritten rules? Were there any other notable practices that stood out in the study?
Well, aside from those core guidelines about the setting, timing, and social context, there were also some interesting practices around what they did before consuming ketamine
Okay.
and certain behaviors they actively avoided.
I'm all ears. It sounds like they've really thought this through, developed a whole system for minimizing risks. What kind of pre-use rituals did they have?
Well, remember those DIY quality control methods we talked about?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those stood out to me.
The sight, the smell, observing others.
It was almost like a chef carefully inspecting their ingredients before they start cooking.
Over half of the participants reported doing these sensory checks before taking ketamine.
Wow.
They wanted to be as sure as they could about the quality and purity of the substance.
It's a very hands-on, almost intuitive approach.
Yeah.
Especially compared to, like buying a pill where you don't really have a way to assess it.
Right.
Visually, they're taking their safety into their own hands.
And it shows a real commitment to harm reduction.
Yeah.
They're not just passively accepting whatever is given to them.
Right?
They're actively taking steps to minimize those potential risks.
Were there any other pre-use practices that stood out in the study?
Yeah, about 40% of the participants reported observing the effects of ketamine on others
Oh, interesting.
before taking it themselves.
Okay.
And this was particularly common among those who used more frequently.
That's fascinating. That like a real-time safety check,
Right.
using their friends' experiences to gauge the potency and the potential effects.
A watch and learn approach.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of social learning within this community.
Yeah.
They're relying on these shared experiences and observations to make informed decisions.
Right.
It makes you wonder how much of this knowledge is passed down just through word of mouth,
Yeah.
through these social networks. It's like a hidden curriculum of harm reduction, separate from any official guidelines.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the power of peer-to-peer education, especially when those official sources of information might not be trusted or accessible.
Okay, so they're checking the quality they're watching their friends.
Yeah.
What about behaviors they specifically avoided? Did the study mention anything about that?
Yes. One of the most common practices reported by over 70% of the participants was avoiding specific methods of consumption.
Okay.
The study didn't go into detail about which methods they considered risky, but it suggests a clear awareness that how you take ketamine can significantly impact the risks involved.
Right, because we know that some methods of administration, like injecting, carry a much higher risk of overdose and other complications.
Right.
So it seems like they're consciously trying to stick with the safer options.
Exactly. It challenges that assumption that recreational drug use is always reckless or uninformed.
Right.
They're actually exhibiting a surprising degree of caution and awareness.
Were there any other behaviors that they specifically avoided?
Yeah. Almost 30% of the participants mentioned that they never shared drug-taking implements,
Okay.
like straws or pipes.
Well, that's good.
This is crucial, you know,
I'm for
preventing the spread of infectious diseases.
It's encouraging to hear, even within a close-knit social group, they're still taking those precautions.
Yeah.
It shows a sense of responsibility, not only for their own health, but for the well-being of others in their community.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered pre-use rituals and things they avoided. What about just general warnings or guidelines they adhered to?
One of the most prominent warnings mentioned by just under half of the participants was the importance of limiting how much ketamine they used in a given session.
Which is a pretty fundamental harm reduction principle.
Right, but I imagine it's easier said than done.
Yeah, especially in a party atmosphere where you might get carried away.
Absolutely. So the fact that they're consciously trying to moderate their intake speaks volumes about their commitment to harm reduction.
Did the study mention any other notable warnings or guidelines?
Yeah, just over a third of the participants mention taking steps to prevent physical harm,
Okay.
which could include things like staying hydrated, eating before using ketamine, or making sure they were in a safe environment where they wouldn't accidentally injure themselves.
It's interesting how these strategies extend beyond just the drug itself.
Right.
They're thinking about their overall well-being,
Yeah.
both physical and mental.
Yeah, it's a much more holistic approach than you might expect.
You know, this whole conversation has really shifted my perspective on this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we tend to think of harm reduction as something that's imposed from the outside.
Yeah.
But these users have created their own system from the ground up, based on their own lived experiences.
And it's surprisingly sophisticated.
It is. They're addressing everything from sourcing and quality control to setting timing, social context, and specific behaviors to avoid. It's a comprehensive, peer-driven approach.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, how do these informal harm reduction strategies compare to the official guidelines or interventions that are out there?
Right. Are they more or less effective? Are there any lessons to be learned from this hidden world of ketamine use?
That's a great question, and it's something we should definitely explore further because there's a lot we can learn from these user-generated systems, even if they exist outside the mainstream. You know, it's easy to assume that official guidelines backed by research and medical expertise would be the gold standard.
Yeah.
But when you look at a study like this, it makes you wonder if those guidelines are always hitting the mark,
Right.
especially, when they might feel detached from the realities of people's lives.
Yeah, because it's one thing to read a pamphlet or a website, but it's quite another to navigate these risks in a real-world setting,
Exactly.
with all the social pressure and complexities.
Right. Official guidelines can be incredibly valuable, don't get me wrong.
Of course.
They provide a broader perspective on risks. They draw on scientific evidence, and they offer a framework for things like regulation and quality control.
Right, which are obviously lacking in these informal systems.
Exactly.
Like those DIY quality checks, they might work to some extent,
Right.
but they're not foolproof.
No, they're not.
Having some kind of official testing and regulation could offer a much higher level of protection.
Absolutely. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Those official guidelines can sometimes come across as kind of clinical or judgmental, even stigmatizing,
Right.
and that can make them less likely to be embraced by the very communities they're trying to reach.
It's like that old saying, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. If
Exactly.
people feel judged or misunderstood,
Right.
they're less likely to trust the information,
Uh-huh.
no matter how well-intentioned it might be.
And what's so fascinating about these informal systems is that adaptability. These users are constantly learning from each other, sharing their experiences, updating their strategies as needed. It's very dynamic.
It's harm reduction on the fly,
It is.
a grassroots movement driven by the people it's meant to protect. There's a real sense of ownership and empowerment in that.
Absolutely. And it highlights a crucial point. Effective harm reduction isn't just about providing information. It's about creating a culture of safety, trust, and shared responsibility within these communities.
So maybe there's something to be learned from these two approaches.
Right.
Perhaps the most effective harm reduction strategies are the ones that combine the scientific rigor of official guidelines with the lived experience and adaptability of these user-generated systems.
That's a really insightful observation because at the end of the day, it's about meeting people where they are, respecting their autonomy, and empowering them to make informed choices.
So the deep dive has been quite a journey.
It has.
We've really gone deep into the world of ketamine use, uncovering a hidden system of harm reduction that's both intricate and surprisingly respondable.
It's a testament to human ingenuity and resilience.
It really is.
And a reminder that the realities of drug use are often far more nuanced and complex than the stereotypes we tend to hold.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Right.
Hopefully it sparks some curiosity, some new ways of thinking about substance use and harm reduction.
Yeah, because whether we're talking about ketamine or any other substance, the goal is to find ways to minimize harm and promote well-being.
Absolutely.
And that requires a multifaceted approach, one that draws on science, lived experience, and a deep respect for individual choice.
And as we continue to learn more about ketamine, its effects and its potential uses, both medical and recreational, it's important to keep these conversations going, to keep learning, keep adapting, and keep finding ways to support each other in navigating this complex and ever-changing landscape. That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.